I can remember being cross-legged on the floor in front of the television, watching my now heroes. I didn't know that yet, but seeing someone like Julia Child or the Galloping Gourmet or the Frugal Gourmet at the time, creating dishes with exotic ingredients that at a 7-year-old's mindset, mac and cheese and chicken tenders were the epitome of culinary delight. But I was intrigued, I was enchanted by how they could take these ingredients, fashion them into almost like a science project mixed with an art piece, and then in the end, it's edible. I was blown away. So it took me on this path where I knew eventually I was going to be a chef. So inevitably, I found myself in culinary school in Pittsburgh. And the first day I walked in, on the board was a term. I couldn't even pronounce it because it was in French, but yet I didn't know that yet. Mise en place. The teacher then asked every student, what do you think this means? None of us could pronounce it, but then none of us could define it. In reality, it would define our whole careers moving forward. Mise en place means in essentially everything in its place. It's defined as the preparation and organization of food before execution, if you will. So let's talk about mise en place and how it affects a chef's day-to-day life. So for me as a chef, the day starts the night before. How do I purchase food? How do I staff? How do I lay out the groundwork for a successful day in the next morning? So as I go into my office at the end of service, I go in and I start to gather data. Over the course of the week and months before, how much of each product have I sold? And how am I going to quantify that and equate it into a purchase for the next day, right? So then as I lay that to rest and I go get a good night's sleep, we call that a brain dump, so I can actually go home and rest. The next morning when I arrive at the restaurant, products being delivered, staff is coming in, we're setting out on a collaborative project to prepare ourselves for the service ahead of us, right? And this goes into the minute details. How many portions of fish are we going to sell? Then all the accoutrement that goes with that dish, how do they actually fit in with that dish, and how much of that do we need, right? So mise en place has become a mantra in the restaurant world, and almost a way that, like, without mise en place and this mantra of mise en place, we cannot operate, right? We have to be prepared. So when I talk about mise en place, and a great pop culture icon, Anthony Bourdain, once wrote, mise en place is the religion of every good line cook. On a more lighthearted note, Glamour magazine says, the night before, wash and chop your vegetables. It makes things easier, right? And then they say professionals call this mise en place. So the funny thing is that it reminds me that mise en place can encompass lots of different things and can be identified in our day-to-day life. So for me, mise en place has ruled my life. And then there came this one point in my career where it became more paramount and present than ever before. It was a Friday night at 5:30 p.m. And as you know, in the restaurant business, Fridays are our Super Bowl, if you will. And the hostess comes up to me and says, "Chef, you have a phone call. It's the Food Network." I said, okay. So I go to the phone and I answer. And on the other line, a gentleman named Jordan says, "Hi, Chef. This is Jordan from the Food Network's Chopped. And we're wondering if you'd be interested in maybe becoming a contestant on our show." And the first thing that came across my head, well, I have a restaurant to run and it's quite busy, and I don't know if I can sacrifice the time away from the restaurant as much as it sounds so enticing. He said, "Chef, one day of filming, New York City, we'll have you right back to the restaurant before you know it." And I said, "Well, you know what? I'm in." And so Jordan says, could you please fill out this online application and then we'll get back to you. So as I hung up the phone, I said, there's no way I'm going to end up on the Food Network's Chopped. I'm probably just another name in the cold call list, but I'm going to do this anyway. So I fill out the application. I wake up the next morning to a voicemail from Jordan saying, Chef, we loved your application. Would you like to do a Skype tomorrow? And I said, wow, this is moving pretty fast. I do the Skype, and before we even hang up on the Skype call, they said, we'd like to send a production crew down to film a package, and we want you to come on the show and film April 9th. And this was middle of January. I said, wow, this is quick. And have I mentioned, I've never seen an episode of Chopped before in my life. So here, what happens here is I take this mantra that I've been living my whole career and the idea of preparing for success. And I sat down at the dining room table with my wife and I said, we're going to lay out a game plan so I can go to New York and I can win Chopped. And step one, clear my DVR of all my Dawson's Creek episodes that I love so much. And in turn, fill it with Chopped episodes. I started to watch fanatically. And it wasn't just to watch and see how the cooks do. I was taking crib notes. I was looking at all of the equipment. Am I familiar with that equipment? So when I'm there, I know exactly how to use it. Where do they store certain items? So when all of the other contestants are looking around and rummaging, I know exactly where they keep the butter. I know exactly what spices there are. I was freeze framing it and finding out what spices and how they were lined up. Then I thought about judges. People are individuals. They have individual likes and dislikes, right? So I went over and I found out every judge's likes and dislikes, and I memorized them because there are like 10 judges and they're only going to be 3 on my panel. I need to know everyone's. So as the time went by, I started to practice closer to it. I'd have my cooks bring in weird ingredients from their cabinets, and I would have to do a mystery basket competition using these items I would never know. It helped me learn time management, which as a chef is something that we do all the time. But working in those constraints to formulate, create, and then execute is a little more difficult. And it's proven to be the foil for most of the competitors. So as I did these practices, I kept going over notes and living in the moment or reliving how I'm going to do this. Once I actually found myself on set, it was like I had done it a million times. And I was grounded and living in the moment and present. And I feel like a lot more prepared than most. And with that came great success. I'm happy to say that I did win that championship. And I still remember the elation on the other end of the call when I called my wife after the filming. And it was a wonderful feather in my cap. Now, when I got home and the show aired, people wanted to hear the story. And I love telling a good story. And what I came to realize when telling the story, the takeaway wasn't about the win or the experience. It was about the preparation. It was about setting myself up for success. And I started to think to myself, are people into that story because of that and they can relate it to their occupation and what they do? Because preparation is relevant in everyone's job. One of the moments that it hit me is with the winnings from Chopped. I vowed that my wife and I were going to buy a farm, and we were going to follow our dream of being closer to the land, building a life for our children that is one where they feel engaged with living in the seasons. We love that. And as a chef, I live in the seasons all the time when it comes to product. And as we were sitting at the closing table, there was paper lined up. All the papers and things I had to sign were all systematically in a row. And the pencils and pens were all lined up. And I said to my wife, this realtor's mise en place is on point, right? And then I started to think about pro athletes. A pro football player just doesn't walk on the field on Sunday and expect to become a Hall of Famer. He watches tape, he studies, he practices obsessively, right? And that's a form of mise en place, being prepared and ready for the day. So when you execute, it's like you've done it a million times, right? So as we started to go that route, I thought about, how does this affect my day-to-day? Am I living mise en place without even knowing it? And I was. On Sundays, when it's time to do the yard work, I don't go out go right into the yard work. I take inventory. Do I have enough gas in the lawnmower? Do I have all my trimmer? I'd hate to be out there in the middle of it and then I have to stop, right? I'm making sure I'm prepared. So there I was a second time at the dining room table, and I'm sitting with my wife, and she was compiling a list for the week of groceries. Now, let me go back and preface. My wife, when we first married, was diagnosed with a brain tumor, which gave her epilepsy. And one of the side effects was she lost some of her short-term memory. And so her life became a life of creating lists, making notes, over-communicating. But these are ways that helped her navigate this new life she was leading. And now today, it's become such a habitual act that you would never know that she struggled through that for a few years. And I started to think to myself, is this another takeaway from the preparation idea and the mise en place idea of life? Lisa creates these lists to be prepared for the week, and not only for preparation, but to alleviate anxieties and stressors of the unknown of what her week's going to be, right? Just like how I prepare my mise en place at the restaurant to eliminate the stressors and anxiety of, am I prepared enough to execute a dinner service, right? So my challenge here to those out there and our colleagues here, identify those things in your life that create stress, create anxiety. And are there places or are there systems that you can put in place that can help eliminate that, right? Because if you do, like, the unknown is what we fear most, right? If we can create ways to eliminate that fear and build confidence in what we're moving forward to, it can create a recipe for a more calm and grounded life. So I thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.